Thanks a lot, Chase, and thanks everyone for joining. Um, we are going to talk about the expressive power of geometric deep learning models today. We're going to talk about graphs, and then we are going to talk about topological deep learning. Most of the talking today will be done by my students, but I would like to use maybe 2 or 3 minutes in order to broadly introduce what we are doing in my lab and what we are interested in. First of all, we are situated in Haifa, in Israel, in the Technion, in the electrical and computer engineering faculty. The lab has 8 students and postdocs now, all of which are doing great stuff on geometric deep learning and related areas. Okay, so essentially we have 2 focus areas. First thing is to come up with new architectures that can work well on structured data types. And those architectures are mostly symmetry-aware architectures. That means that we try to understand what are the natural symmetries of the entities that we are trying to learn, and then develop models that take into account those symmetries. The second thing that we are interested in, and is very related to what we are going to talk about today, is to study these architectures theoretically. So not only we want to propose new models, but we want to understand why they work well or don't work well. When we talk about data with symmetries, we have several families of data types that we are interested in. Of course, this is not the full thing, but it covers a lot of things that we are interested in. So first of all, we're interested in graphs and other related data types. So for example, hypergraphs, combinatorial complexes, and things of this sort. We are also interested in sets. Sets are essentially data structures in which we do not really care about the order in which the elements are given to us. So this includes point clouds. It includes sets of elements with their own symmetries. For example, we will see today an example of sets of graphs. And this will be particularly interesting in the first talk. And then something that we began working on very recently, and we think it has a major potential to become like a major tool in the deep learning community, is learning in weight spaces. So the idea is to have models train and take as input other models or weights of other models. And interestingly, those weights, they have their own symmetries as well. So this is a very particular and interesting case of geometric deep learning on its own. So in that case, we are interested in learning on standard weight spaces of MLPs and CNNs, but also on LoRa weight spaces, on gradients of models, on activation spaces, and so on. Hopefully, we will be able to talk about that at some future meeting. So today we're going to talk about 2 lines of works that are kind of connected. We'll have 2 lectures by my students, 30 minutes each. The first one will be given by Guy Bar-Shalom, who will present his work on a family of expressive GNNs we call subgraph GNNs and their connection to the Cartesian product of graphs. And the second talk will be given by Yam Eitan and Yoav Gelberg, and they will talk about the expressivity limitations of current topological deep learning models and how to solve those limitations. We'll now pass the torch to Guy to give his first lecture. Thanks.
Okay, hey everyone. My name is Guy Bar-Shalom, and I'll be presenting to you subgraph GNNs and their connection to the graph Cartesian product. So this talk is going to be based on two papers. The first one is subgraph-former, unifying subgraph GNNs and graph transformers via graph products. And the second one is a flexible equivariant framework for subgraph GNNs via graph products and graph coarsening. So the outline for the talk is going to be as follows. I'm going to start with some background. So this is going to include what are graphs and how do we typically learn on graphs, and what is the limitation of the kind of most researched way to learn on graphs. This is going to bring us to subgraph GNNs as a solution. And hopefully by then I will convince you that this is a good approach to use subgraph GNNs techniques. And then I'm going to draw a connection between subgraph GNNs and graph products. And this is going to allow us to develop positional encodings for subgraph GNNs and more efficient subgraph GNNs. Okay, so some basics. So what is graph learning? What is a graph? So a graph is this object that you see here on the left side of the screen. And it is typically represented as an adjacency matrix that you see on the right. And the way people typically learn do graph learning is by message passing neural networks, which is basically local aggregations with learnable functions. So each node representation is going to be updated by its own representation and the representation of its neighbors. So this is going to be one layer. We do this again and again and again to get final node representations, and then to get a graph level representation, we aggregate this by some pooling layer, which is typically a sum or an average of those final node representations. So those MPNNs, they're very efficient, they work pretty well, but they do have some limitation. So for example, consider these two molecules, which are represented here as graphs. And these two graphs are different. But if I would apply an MPNN on these two, then for any parameterized MPNN, we're going to have the exact same final graph representation for each of these two. And this is a problem. But before I explain why this is a problem, why this is the case, why do we get the same graph representation? So the expressive power or separation power of MPNNs is bounded by the WL heuristic or WL test. And what is the WL test? So we start with a graph with nodes that have initial colorings, and then we update each node's color by its own color and the multiset of its neighbors, of the color of its neighbors. And we do this again and again until we get to a stable coloring. And this final stable coloring can be corresponded to a histogram. And the thing is that this 1WL test is necessary, but not sufficient for graph isomorphism. And what this means that if the 1WL test on G1 is different than 1WL on G2, then this means that G1 and G2 are different. But if 1WL on G1 is equal to 1WL on G2, then G1 and G2 might still be different. And the final note is that if 1WL can distinguish two graphs, then an MPNN cannot do it as well, because MPNN inherits this limitation, inherits this limitation from the 1WL test. Okay, so at this point, I kind of quickly covered what are graphs and how do we typically learn on these graphs, and what's one of the main limitations of this message passing approach. So now I'm going to turn to subgraph GNNs, which are more expressive architectures, which can separate more graphs, basically. Okay, the main idea behind subgraph GNNs is to look at graphs as sets of subgraphs. And the intuition is that even if MPNNs cannot distinguish two graphs, their subgraphs might be easily separable. So here we see an example of two graphs in their 1WL histogram, which is the same. So an MPNN is not going to be able to distinguish these two graphs. But if we look at their subgraphs, then we're going to get two sets of histograms. Each set is corresponded to an original graph. And these two sets of histograms are different. So the intuition is that MPNNs on those sets of subgraphs can separate the original two graphs. So to make this whole subgraph GNN idea a bit more concrete, what do we actually do? So we start with an original graph that you see here on the bottom left. We map this graph into a set or bag of subgraphs by some selection policy. So this can be node deletion, node marking, edge deletion, and so on. I'm going to focus on this talk on node marking. And so node marking, what it simply means is that we copy this original graph n times if it has n nodes, and then we mark the ith node in the ith subgraph. And once we have this bag of subgraphs, we process it in a principled way, potentially with information sharing between the subgraphs. Okay, so this paradigm is kind of general, and many subgraph GNNs architectures were suggested. For the rest of this talk, I'm going to focus on the maximally expressive subgraph GNN, which takes the following form. So before I dive into the equation, I will introduce some notation. So x of S and V is going to denote the feature of node V in subgraph S. And the following update that you see is the node update for the most expressive subgraph GNN. So to provide some intuition on what it actually does, it basically does three types of aggregation. So the first one is called the pointwise update, and it basically sends information from the marked node or the root node to all the nodes in its column. It also does what we term internal subgraph connectivity, which is basically like copying the original graph n times. And there's also the external subgraph connectivity, which is kind of like the internal subgraph connectivity when you fix the grid and transpose the edges. And a final note about this is that the pointwise update is kind of artificial. It's not very related to the topology of the original graph, but the internal and external connectivities do hold property that is related to the original graph's topology. Okay, so at this point, I hope I kind of motivated subgraph GNNs that they're useful and what exactly they are. And now I'm going to draw a connection between subgraph GNNs and graph products. And this is going to allow us to develop positional encodings for subgraph GNNs and make them more efficient. Okay, so if you would want to come up with positional encodings for subgraph GNNs, what is the challenge? Why isn't this straightforward like for a standard graph? So the first challenge is adjacency, because we have three adjacencies for subgraph, for this maximally expressive subgraph GNN. But it's pretty straightforward to pick AG and AGS, which are the two right ones, because they hold information about the original graph's topology. But another challenge is efficiency. So each of these matrices belong to Rn squared times n squared. So applying standard eigen decomposition is not really an option because it's too costly. So the connection between subgraph GNNs and graph products is going to help us solve this complexity issue. So before I dive into this connection, what is the graph Cartesian product? So the formal definition is on the left, but it's pretty easy to understand it from the example on the right. So we have, for example, two graphs, G1 and G2. And the graph Cartesian product between G1 and G2 is going to simply copy G1 5 times for each node in G2 and maintain the connectivity for each copy. And it's going to also copy G2 4 times that correspond to the 4 nodes of G1 and maintain the connectivity, G2's connectivity for each copy. And the final result is what you see on the right, where you see G1 Cartesian product G2. And the adjacency that corresponds to this is going to be A2 chronicle product I plus I chronicle product A1 where A1 and A2 are the adjacencies of G1 and G2. So now we have this observation that actually the internal and external connectivities, which we are interested in, have a special structure. So the one on the left is actually chronicle product A, and the one on the right is actually A cross I. And if you would take G Cartesian product with itself, you're going to get exactly the sum of these two adjacencies, AG and AGS, which is basically what we are interested in. So now that we know that we are basically looking at the graph Cartesian product of G with itself, we need to find positional encoding for the Cartesian product of G with itself. And this basically was already developed. So this proposition, this old proposition, says that the eigenvectors and eigenvalues of the Laplacian of G Cartesian product G is the chronicle product of the eigenvectors of the Laplacian of the original graph G. And the implication of this is that we only need to apply eigen decomposition to the original small graph. And the implication of this is that the complexity is the same as if you would have computed PE for the original graph. So to provide a bit of intuition, what does this give us, this positional encoding for the product graph? I'm showing here a visualization of the first non-trivial eigenvector over the original graph. This is going to be the top part. And I do the same for the product graph, which is the bottom part. And we see on the top 4 different colors, and at the bottom, we see 10 different colors. So at least intuitively, we do gain some sort of information by using positional encodings. So some experiments. So we benchmarked our method with subgraph GNNs, graph transformers, and other architectures for graphs. And what you see here is the results over the Zinc 12K dataset and the Zinc full dataset. And we pretty much outperformed all of these baselines. We also tested our method on the OGB datasets, again, against graph transformers and subgraph GNNs. And in 2 out of the 3 datasets, we also outperformed these baselines. Okay, now I'm going to move to the second part of this talk, which is to develop efficient subgraph GNNs, because subgraph GNNs do give you more expressive power, you do gain, but it doesn't come for free, because the original graph had n nodes, and now this new object that we are processing, which is more expressive, has n squared nodes. And what we ask is, can we better control this performance complexity trade-off? Do we have to jump from n to n squared, or can we do somewhere in between? People already thought about this, and the most natural thing to try is stochastic sampling. What this means is that I'm only going to sample certain subgraphs. So for example, here I sampled only the first one, the second one, and the fourth one. And I'm keeping edges that both their source node and target node were sampled. So this is a simple approach, but it also has drawbacks because it does not perform great and it's not equivariant. So people took it a step further and tried to learn what to sample. And the pros is that it's better, it performs better, but it's still not great. And the cons are that it's pretty hard to train because it uses discrete sampling in RL. So it takes around 1,000 to 4,000 epochs to converge. And it only uses it's only useful for learning a very small bag size. This is an empirical observation. So what this means is that it only works well if you sample 3 to 5 subgraphs, more or less. So our goals is going to be as follows. We want to develop a unified method controlling this performance complexity trade-off. And we want to use standard training protocols, try to avoid discrete sampling or reinforcement learning based techniques, and to improve performance. So I remind you that this delta, this square was the graph Cartesian product operator. And we had this result that the main connectivity of subgraph, the maximally expressive subgraph GNN, basically corresponds to the graph Cartesian product of G with itself. So given this, the main idea was very simple. What if we relax the first element in this product? What I mean by this is instead of doing G Cartesian product with G, what if we do T of G Cartesian product with G, where T is some coarsening function? So more specifically, the paradigm is as follows. We start with a graph G. We apply a coarsening function to G, which creates a cluster of nodes with induced connectivity from the original graph. And then we apply the graph Cartesian product between T of G and G and get a new main connectivity. So what do we get by this product? So the first thing that we have is that we basically control the number of nodes that we process. And this is simply by the coarsening function T, which controls the number of subgraphs that you get. We also have the main connectivity simply by applying the graph Cartesian product. And now we asked, is there anything else we can leverage here? What else can we do here to improve upon this? And then we took a step back and tried to understand what are we processing. So we have a new node feature tensor, which is a function of a set which corresponds to the rows and comes from T of G, and the function of a node V, which comes from the original graph G and corresponds to the columns. Taking a symmetry perspective, we know that the symmetry group for graphs is permutations. And for our node feature tensor, this permutation acts as follows. So it permutes both the elements in the set and the node V. Now, given that we know the group action and the node feature tensor, we can develop the proper parameter sharing scheme that respects this symmetry. But our guiding principle was that if you use instead of T of G, if you use for T simply the identity, so not doing anything, we wanted our method to collapse to the maximally expressive subgraph GNN. That makes us feel that we are on the right track. So to do that, we developed this pretty simple analogy between parameter sharing and MPNNs on a fully connected graph with edge features. So it goes as follows. A standard linear layer takes the following form, and it can also be equivariant if Wij has the proper parameter sharing scheme that respects the symmetry. And the slight more general form is instead of doing Wij times xj, we can have a function which is a function of Wij and j. And this is also equivariant. And this very much reminds of message passing, because xi can be thought of as the target node, xj as the source node, Wij as the edge feature between the source node and the target node, and f is simply the message function. And now we can basically implement the equivariant layer by simply using an MPNN on a fully connected graph with the proper edge features. So as I said before, the guiding principle was to collapse to maximally expressive subgraph GNN when T is the identity. So we chose a subset of the parameters in W, a subset of the weights, basically, which correspond to basis vectors that build W. So we are still equivariant, and this can be visualized on the left here. So these are the edges that correspond to the weights that we chose. So we ended up simply processing what you see here, those equivariant updates, this structure, and the graph Cartesian product between T of G and G. Okay, to show, to benchmark our result, our method, what we did is the following experiment. So what you see here is results on zinc 12K. So the y-axis is the MAE, and it is inverted, so high is going to be better. The x-axis is the bag size, or the number of clusters, or the number of subgraphs. And we benchmarked against efficient subgraph GNNs, that's the kind of cluster on the left, and full bag subgraph GNNs, that's the cluster on the right. And our method pretty much outperformed all of these baselines across all bag sizes, almost. And we also have a representator somewhere in the middle, which the other efficient subgraph GNNs cannot really have. We also conducted an ablation study to test the symmetry-based updates that we developed. What you see here is the results over zinc 12K for a bag size of 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we ran our method with and without the symmetry-based updates. And it's pretty evident that they play a key role in our architecture. Okay, to conclude, I'm just going to say that in general, using graph transformations plus MPNNs is interesting instead of trying to develop complex architectures from scratch, because MPNNs are easy to use. And we now see that we can gain expressivity with MPNNs with the proper transformations. And specifically, maybe other graph products are interesting to try because they are pretty easy to implement and use. Another interesting point is that we use the subset of the equivariant updates, but maybe actually others equivariant updates that we did not use can be beneficial. And finally, we implemented T as spectral clustering. So it's pretty simple. Maybe other instantiations of T or even learning T can be better. And what are the next steps? So now we ask, can we go beyond graphs? And the next talk by Yam and Yoav is going to be about topological deep learning, which includes a more general data structures. And we're going to see that there are going to be expressivity issues there as well. And interestingly, principles behind subgraph GNNs can be beneficial to kind of solve these expressivity issues. Okay, thank you. And now I think Yam and Yoav are going to continue.
Perhaps we should ask questions before moving on, or would you prefer to do that afterwards?
Whatever you prefer.
Maybe we can open up the floor for questions now.
Sure.
Are there any questions in the chat? So I had a question, and part of this comes from me not fully understanding. But I think a lot of your images showed undirected graphs. Is there any problem when going from directed to undirected, or does the map just work out the same either way?
So I think I think all our experiments are on undirected graph, but I don't see any reason that you cannot extend it to directed graphs.
Okay. Then I guess we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay.
Thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
Okay. So hey everyone, I'm Yam.
Yeah, we have.
And we're going to present our work titled Topological Blind Spots, Understanding and Extending Topological Deep Learning Through the Lens of Expressivity. And this is a collaborative work with Guy, who just talked, Fabrizio Fresca, Michael Bronstein, and Haggai Maron. So the outline of this talk is going to be the following. First, we're going to discuss what even is topology and what is topological deep learning. Then we're going to present an expressivity limitation of current commonly used topological deep learning architectures. And then we're going to suggest a model which solves some of these expressivity limitations. And finally, we're going to present some experiments to validate our approach. So first, what is topology? Topology studies topological invariants, which are properties of shapes that are invariant under continuous deformation. So they stay the same even if you bend, twist, or stretch the space, but not necessarily if you tear it or cut it. And as a first primary example, we're going to be looking at homology. Homology is a very fundamental topological invariant, and the n-dimensional homology captures the structure of the n-dimensional holes of a space. So for example, the zero-dimensional homology just captures the number of connected components. The one-dimensional homology captures the numbers of loops or holes. The two-dimensional homology captures the structure of the cavities in the space. So you can think of a sphere, an empty sphere. The space that it captures, that is contained within it, is sort of like a two-dimensional hole. And this can be extended to any dimension. As you can imagine, given a space, if you morph it continuously without tearing it or cutting it, the number of holes is going to stay the same. And so this is invariant to continuous deformation and is a topological property. So to illustrate a little better homology, let's look at the torus, which is a very classical example of a topological space. So the torus has two one-dimensional holes, as you can see in the slide marked in blue and green. And it has one two-dimensional hole, which is sort of the space that it surrounds. And another fundamental topological property which we're going to be interested in is orientability. So orientability of a space sort of captures whether the space has inherent sides or direction. So for example, you can think of the cylinder on the left. It is orientable. It has an inside and an outside. If you're an ant and you're walking on the inside of the cylinder, you'll never reach the outside, and vice versa. But the Mobius strip on the right is non-orientable. It can't really be divided that way. If you're an ant, you can walk around it all over and reach from each point to the other. And again, if you stretch or bend space and it has sides, it's still going to have sides. So this is a topological invariant. Okay, and now topological deep learning aims to apply deep learning to topological objects. And it has various goals. The first is to be able to capture more diverse data types that are topological and not necessarily just graphs. But the second important one is to be able to leverage topological information to improve performance over graph methods like message passing, which Guy introduced. In fact, it was shown that topological deep learning models improve expressivity over message passing neural networks. And like I said, topological deep learning is applied over a variety of data types. The most common examples are cellular complexes, simplicial complexes, combinatorial complexes, and hypergraphs. Here we're going to be focusing on combinatorial complexes, as this is the most general data type out of the four, and it's fairly straightforward to explain. So we can think of a combinatorial complex as a generalization of a graph. It also has nodes like graphs, but now rather than edges, it's going to have cells. Cells are essentially just sets of nodes, but they don't have to be pairs of nodes. They can be just a single node, or they can be 3 nodes or any number of nodes. And additionally, each cell is going to have a rank, and this rank sort of introduces a hierarchy to the cells, which is some additional important structure. So let's look at an example. Let's see how we can think of a molecule as a combinatorial complex. In the example illustrated in the slide, the atoms are 0 cells in orange. The bonds or edges are going to be 1 cells, and they're depicted in pink. And you can think of higher order relations of importance like rings or functional groups of the molecule as higher order cells, and they're depicted in green and blue and purple. So now we saw that message passing neural networks are a very prominent architecture for graphs, and we sort of want to try and generalize this to the combinatorial complex setting. And as a first step to do that, we first need to define connectivity over the cells. In order to do message passing, we need to understand what messages are being exchanged. And in order to do that, we define the notion of a neighborhood function. So a neighborhood function is a very general thing. Here we're going to be focused on the most common examples of neighborhood functions that are concretely being used, which is adjacency and co-adjacency neighborhood functions. So 2 cells are connected via an adjacency neighborhood functions if they both are contained in a 3rd cell, and they're connected via a co-adjacency function if they both contain a 3rd cell. And the adjacency and co-adjacency can have a specification of the ranks of cells that are either contained or are contained in the 2 cells respectively. If that wasn't super clear, let's look at some examples to better illustrate. So in this example, the left and right 2 cells are connected in the 2-0 co-adjacency, since they both contain the same orange node in the middle. They're not connected, however, in the 2-1 co-adjacency, since there is no 1 cell or edge, pink edge, that is contained in both. Another example is that the 0-1 adjacency is basically exactly like the graph adjacency of the matrix. So here the 2 nodes depicted are connected by an edge, so they're connected by the 0-1 adjacency. But these 2 nodes are not connected by an edge, so they're not connected by the 0-1 adjacency. However, they are connected by the 0-2 adjacency, since they both are contained in the big blue 2 cell that's depicted in the slide. Okay, so now we're ready to define higher order message passing, which is the most commonly used topological deep learning architecture for learning over combinatorial complexes. And higher order message passing is a direct generalization of graph message passing, which we saw at Guy's talk. Basically, the main 2 differences is that now, instead of passing messages through nodes, it passes messages from cell to cell. And now it doesn't have a single connectivity structure like in the graph, just the adjacency. It has several connectivity structures that some of them we saw a few slides ago. And what it does is it passes messages across each connectivity structure, and now each cell gets various messages, and then it aggregates all those messages for a single final update of each cell feature vector. Now Yoav is going to be talking about some expressivity limitations of this model.
Cool. So thank you, Yam. So as Yam mentioned, the sort of main, as in the GNN literature, the main framework is again message passing. And if we go back to the topological, sort of the premise of topological deep learning is we want to integrate this topological information in the hope that it's going to lead to better models. Now, the thing is that in order for that to be the case, we first need to make sure that our current models, that is the message passing models, are actually able to capture the topology, right? So as mentioned in Guy's lecture, message passing for graphs is known to have expressivity limitations, and often it fails to distinguish even simple non-isomorphic graphs like the one in Guy's talk. So it's sort of natural to ask whether similar phenomena persist for higher order message passing as well. And more concretely, we focus on questions of the type, can a topological deep learning model assign different representations to different topological objects? And I want to stress here that the emphasis here is on topological. So we specifically care about the model's ability to capture topological properties, not just arbitrary properties of the complex. And sort of answering questions like this, can we have a different representation for a cylinder in a Mobius strip, sort of captures whether we can capture the notion of orientability. Because if we can't do that, then we basically can't learn or to use orientability as a property. So to answer this question, we find that surprisingly, in many cases, the answer is no. So we find examples of topological objects that differ in fundamental topological invariance, which are indistinguishable by any higher order message passing model. So, for example, to start from the left, we have sort of a thin torus and a thicker torus. They have different diameters, but any higher order message passing model that's going to process these two objects, no matter what its parameters are, is always going to output an identical representation. So we cannot differentiate between the two. The same goes for the cylinder here on top and the Mobius strip. They're defined on the same number of nodes, but they clearly they define different topological objects because, as Yam mentioned, one is orientable and the other isn't. But again, any message passing based model is going to output the same representation for the two. And for the final example, we can see sort of a large torus and then two smaller tori that have, again, the same number of base 0 cells. Again, for this example, any higher order message passing model is going to output the same representation for the one on top and the two in the bottom. And these two, obviously, these are different spaces, but more specifically, they differ on all homology groups that are non-trivial, sort of because these are two-dimensional objects, then the higher homology groups are trivial. But for the 0, first, and second homology groups, we have different number of holes. It's also rather intuitive. And this sort of means that we can't capture homology as well. So this is kind of disappointing, right? Because if our premise is that using this topology and the topological structure of the objects that we're operating on, we can sort of have better models that can get better performance, then we see that basically we don't have that property. So how do we solve this thing? So when we're thinking about addressing these limitations, we sort of go back to what worked for graph neural networks. So as mentioned in Guy's talk, and in GNN literature, similar expressivity issues were studied extensively, and a wide range of techniques like tensor representations, like equivariant layers, like subgraph-based networks have been developed to overcome this. And we want to leverage these expressive graph methods in our case. So how do we do it? We sort of try to translate the problem of topological learning back to the graph setting. And again, why? Because we have tools to deal with expressivity in the graph setting that we want to apply here. And the idea is to take a complex and extract multiple induced graphs from it. So we can think about it intuitively. Like Yam mentioned, we have several different connectivity structures, right? There's different ways in which cells can be connected. The adjacency, the coadjacency, each one is specified by a rank. And we can literally actually define a graph for each one of these connectivity structures. So here the example is we take the complex to the left, and we want to take the graph that is, its nodes are going to be the two cells, and they're going to be connected via the 2-1 coadjacency. So two cells are connected if they share a single one cell. And taking sort of the associated graph, we get this graph to the right, and this is called the augmented Hess graph. And we can, again, for any neighborhood function, define its associated augmented Hess graph. And then we can just apply any expressive GNN that we want to these augmented Hess graphs. So we, in our paper, study sort of two variants. One is based on IGNs, which are sort of a hierarchy of GNNs that can reach very high expressivity, right? So it basically can be fully expressive for under specific conditions. And we look at subgraph GNNs, which is the sort of the type of networks that Guy was talking about before. And sort of the resulting topological deep learning methods are MCN and SMCN. And MCN is going to be fully expressive for fixed size complexes, and but it's going to be rather sort of expensive to run. And SMCN is more sort of more computationally light, but also, as we're going to see soon, also has some expressivity benefits, basically solving a lot of the issues we saw in the previous slides. So how is this done? Let's look at the figure. We first, this is the subgraph example. So we first create a bag of complexes with marked two cells. As you can see, sort of in the first stage, in the first step, the pink marking on the two cells. Then we extract the augmented Hess graphs related to this bag of complexes, and we process this using a subgraph GNN. And yeah, so this is basically the pipeline. We can do this again for, like in higher order message passing, we do this for different sort of ranks and different connectivity structures. And we'll soon see that this actually solves a lot of the expressivity limitations that we saw. I also just want to mention that other work, such as the recent Topology paper from Nia's group, also uses similar observations and applies GNNs to graph structures associated with the complex. So this is something that people are becoming more and more aware of. So the cool thing is that now, by integrating expressive GNNs into the topological deep learning pipeline, we significantly improve the topological expressivity. And specifically, what we show is that our models can distinguish between the cylinder and the Mobius strip, so they're better at least at detecting irritability. We show that they can capture the full homology structure of any 2D manifold embeddable in R3, and they can count the number of connected components for any complex. And specifically, all of these examples that we have seen before that are indistinguishable by message passing are distinguishable by our method. And what we essentially show here is that GNN expressivity, which sort of is defined in terms of graph isomorphisms and a priori is unrelated to topology in any obvious way, this expressivity can be translated into topological expressivity, enabling us to have models that can better capture the topology. So to give a flavor of how this translation actually happens, how does this work, we're going to present here an implementation of our model that can distinguish between the Mobius strip and the cylinder. So here we have sort of miniature versions of these objects from before. And let's do a quick proof sketch. So how does this work? First, we observe that through message passing, we can detect the boundary edges of the complex. So what are the boundary edges? These are just the 1 cells that are adjacent to exactly one 2 cell. And sort of when you think about it that way, using that definition, it's sort of clear that we can get it using message passing, because we can just count the number of 2 cells connected to each 1 cell via simple message passing. Now, the second step is to notice that the boundary of the cylinder, it forms 2 circles, 2 cycles, and the boundary of the Mobius strip, it sort of forms one winding longer cycle. Now, as seen in Guy's talk, we saw a very similar example to that. This is, if you think about these 2 objects as graphs, these are a classical example of graphs that are indistinguishable by standard MPNNs or message passing neural networks, but almost all expressive GNNs can distinguish these 2 graphs, specifically subgraph GNNs can. So what we do, we just apply subgraph GNNs to this boundary, therefore differentiating the 2 complexes. Which is, I think, pretty neat. So yeah, on top of proving the expressivity of our method, so we proved that we can separate some interesting complexes, we empirically test the topological expressivity of our method. So we do it using 2 synthetic data sets. The first one, we sort of construct a data set consisting of pairs of complexes, where each complex in the pair is built with the same number of cells, but the two are different on at least one fundamental topological invariant. So they're not going to be the same, not going to be the same topological complex, but they are on the same number of constructed on the same number of cells. And then we train, sort of the task is to give different representations to each complex. We do it pair. And what we show is basically, this is a funny table, but we show that our method can learn to differentiate all of these graphs. And as expected from our theory, standard topological deep learning methods, message based ones, cannot differentiate any of them. We construct them so that they're all tori and they're all indistinguishable. But it's nice to see that we can actually learn to distinguish the two, not just theoretically. There is an implementation that does it. The other data set we use is, so we take the zinc data set that contains molecular graphs, sort of just graphs representing molecules. We lift these molecules into complexes, similarly to the way Yam discussed before. And then we look at two metric and topological properties of these objects. So we look at the cross diameter. The cross diameter is the distance between the maximal distance between a 0 cell and a 2 cell in the complex. And we look at the second Betti number, which is the number of two-dimensional holes related to the second homology. And then we train different models to predict these properties from the complexes. So we use first a vanilla version of a topological deep learning method, which is message passing based. Then we create our own custom higher order message passing model that where we try to optimize it as best as we can. And then we try our method, and we see that our method just performs a lot better at predicting these topological properties. So now we basically see that this separation ability translates to actually being able to predict topological properties better. And now the third experiment is where we benchmark our models on a range of real-world molecular regression and prediction tasks. Again, we take all of these are all molecular graph data sets, and we lift them into complexes, and we train our models to predict chemical properties. And so we compare our models to three classes of baselines. First, we compare it to standard message basing neural network, MPNNs. Then we compare them to standard topological deep learning methods, all variants of higher order message passing. And then we compare them to expressive GNNs. And we see that our method basically outperforms all of these baselines, which highlights the value of expressively leveraging the topology of the data. So we can sort of summarize the experiments as, first, we show that we can actually separate complexes the way that we prove that we should be able to do. Then we see that this actually translates to being able to predict topological properties. And then the third experiment shows that these topological properties, being able to use them actually helps predict chemical properties of molecules. So yeah, thanks for everyone for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Anybody have any questions? I guess I can ask some. So I know another strand of research into increasing expressivity in graph neural networks is these sheaf neural networks. Do you know how that fits in with the work you do? Does it at all, or?
So I am not, I'm somewhat familiar with sheaf neural networks. I'm not an expert by any means, but as far as I know, these are methods that operate on graphs. They try to improve graph expressivity. And this sort of the whole idea behind this line of work is to take objects that are naturally represented as these higher order complexes, not just graphs, sort of higher order relations. But there's definitely a connection. Sheaves are a topological object.
I mean, I'm also no expert in these sheaves, but what I'm I know more about are these like Clifford algebra networks. And so I think you can relate topologies to the types of algebras that you're using. So I mean, I would guess that you haven't looked into this area at all, but if you have,
So I haven't looked into this area at all, but I do want to mention sort of another branch or approach to topological deep learning, which is sort of pre-computing topological invariants and do it by hand. You don't learn to compute them. You just have a computational method to compute, for example, persistent homology. It's a common one. And then you integrate these things into the framework. And this also has provable expressivity guarantees.
thank you.